We're going to talk about the election process and public opinion. So, why is the election process important? Well, it's how we choose our other leaders. And this year is an election year, meaning that later on in November, the popular vote is going to count, and then in December, the Electoral College is going to vote. Remember, that's one of our compromises from Unit 2. And we are going to get a new president. So, how do you go from being a citizen all the way to being the president in the White House? There's 4 basic steps to this, and the first one is the campaign. Now, the campaign process continues throughout the entire election process. You can't just campaign 1 or 2 days and quit. So, this is done to bring money and awareness to candidates. This usually starts the summer before an election happens, so most candidates started campaigning last summer, since this year is the election year. So, candidates try and seem more moderate and win some voters, because remember, on our political spectrum, they want the people in the middle because that's where the most voters are. People that are extreme are going to vote for the candidate that is closest to them in political beliefs. So, most of the way they do this, well, some of the ways they can do this is by canvassing. They go either door to door or call phone to phone to try and get support from a candidate. So if you've ever been sitting at your kitchen table at night, ready to eat dinner with your family, and your phone rings and people ask you, sir or ma'am, can I have a minute of your time, and ask you who you're voting for? That's usually part of a campaign. Campaigns are very expensive. So if you're a presidential candidate, most of them, actually all of them, have quit their day job and they have started to campaign to become the President of the United States. This is extremely expensive. Before Hillary Clinton started campaigning, she and Bill Clinton together had collected over $1 billion for the campaign. So, step 2 in this process are primaries and caucuses. This is how we narrow people down from this big pool of presidential candidates into one. And the states get to choose if they want a primary or a caucus, and this is a reserved power. Remember that from Unit 2, it comes from the 10th Amendment. Powers that are not given to the federal government are reserved for the state. So, the first type of the way we narrow down candidates are primaries. So, states vote on presidential candidates and narrow down the field. So, we started with over 20 people who wanted to be president. We started with 20 presidential candidates, and we've got to find a way to make it narrow down to one. You can think of primaries and caucuses like the first round of homecoming. Like when you have a lot of princesses up and you're like, there's no way that we're going to narrow this down into one queen very easily. So you take a couple rounds of votes. So the states vote and see which candidates have the most support and which candidates don't. There are 2 types of primaries. A closed primary, where only members of that party can vote in that primary. So if you're a Republican, you can only vote in the Republican primary, and if you're a Democrat, you can only vote in the Democratic primary. There's another type that's open primaries, and members of either party can vote in either primary, whichever one they want to, but you can only vote once. North Carolina has a semi-open primary, so that means that Republicans still have to vote in the Republican one, and Democrats still have to vote in the Democratic primary. But if you're unaffiliated, you don't align to any party, or if you're an independent, you can vote in either one that you want. But remember, you can only vote once. The other way that we narrow things down is by a caucus. Now, a caucus is the other way that we narrow them down, but they don't actually vote to find support for whichever candidate. Members of that particular party meet and split up into groups based on the candidate they support. You can think of this like a big game of political Red Rover. So this lady right here, she is standing on a chair, very excited about her candidate, and the people sitting at the tables around her support other candidates. People standing on the wall, back over here if you follow my mouse, people standing on the wall haven't decided what candidate they want to support yet, and she is up campaigning for her person, and she wants to make sure that her person has the most people in the group and has the most support. So, they both narrow down the field, and they both show support for candidates. It could cause candidates to drop out if they don't have enough support, but a primary is a vote, and a caucus is a group showing support. So, remember, we're still actively campaigning during this whole process. You can't just stop one day. You have to campaign the whole time. And as a side note, this is in your note sheet, incumbents, people who are already in office, have the advantage because people know their name, they're familiar with them. So when President Obama ran for a second term in 2012, he actually had an advantage over Mitt Romney because people already knew his name. They already knew that he was President Obama, so he has an advantage. All right, the next step, this is step 3, is the National Convention. So this is like your third round if we're still talking about homecoming, right? This is your third round of voting to make sure that people either get into the race for homecoming king or queen or they drop out. So the remaining candidates, after all the states have had either a primary or a caucus, the remaining candidates go into the National Convention, usually 2 or 3, and one comes out. The last man or woman standing is officially nominated by the party, by the delegates of the party. And remember, delegates are people who elect the final candidate for the party, and candidates are the people who are actually running for president. So, if you see down here, this is when Mitt Romney won the presidential nomination from the Republican Party back in 2012 and ran against Obama. So, this is a huge party for the party. You can think of this as a party for the party. There's balloons, his family is up on stage with him, they're waving at all the cameras, and he's showing all the support that he has from the Republican Party. And just in case anybody has any questions about can you not accept the nomination, well, you wouldn't spend all that money and quit your job just to go up there and not accept the nomination. So most people, if they get a nomination, 99.99% of the time, they're going to accept it. And usually people know who the nominee is going to be before they even get to the National Convention. Let's back up just a second. So, the Republican National Convention is happening in Cleveland, Ohio, in Quicken Loans Arena where the Cavs play, if you like the NBA. And Ohio is really important because it's a swing state. North Carolina is also a swing state. That means that they don't always vote Republican and they don't always vote Democrat. It depends on the year. So California is known for always, always, always voting Democrat. So if I were Republican, I wouldn't spend too much time in California, even though they have a lot of electoral votes. People spend a lot of time in Pennsylvania, in Florida, in Ohio, in North Carolina. They're all swing states. They don't have a huge amount of electoral votes, but they do matter when it comes down to it. In fact, the last Democratic presidential candidate to win the presidency without the support of Ohio was JFK, John F. Kennedy, back in 1960. And the last Republican president to win the presidential election without Ohio's votes was Abraham Lincoln in 1860. So, Ohio is a pretty important swing state. The Democratic National Convention is going to take place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is also a swing state. So, who could probably be there? Hillary, Bernie, and whoever might be their vice presidential candidate. This point in time, if the person in, let's say, the Republican Party, whoever is the second runner-up with the second best amount of support, they usually become the vice president. So, again, campaigns are still going on, and remember, their platform, their overall belief, might shape up and change just a little bit. And where you go matters. Your strategy, where you campaign and who you talk to, definitely matters. So, if I were a Republican, I would try and go to Republican states and get their input and get their support, and then go to swing states and make sure that I got the Republican vote for that state. And while they're going through the primaries and the caucuses, candidates want to be more appealing to their particular party. So if you're a Republican, you want to seem more like a Republican, and if you're a Democrat, you want to seem more like a Democrat. So you get a little bit further from the middle, from the moderates, during the primaries and the caucuses, and after the national conventions, after one candidate has been officially elected, people are going to kind of start going back towards the middle to get the moderate voters. Here's some campaign slogans and some symbols: Jeb, Hillary, Ben Carson, Trump, and Bernie. No, he's not flicking people off. That is his index finger, just in case you're wondering. So, the next step, the fourth step, is the general election. And the people vote on representation, and they vote on more than just the president. It's not just Obama or Romney. It's many more offices besides that. This is done in the beginning of November. This is done on the first Tuesday that follows a Monday. So if Tuesday is the first day of the month, they have to wait until the next week. And the Electoral College votes in December. So, if you see down here on this ballot, here's the presidential contest, and then partisan offices. Remember, not judges, because judges are nonpartisan. So your governor would be here, your House of Representatives, your lieutenant governor, the superintendent of public instruction, whoever's going to be in charge of public education. In the state senate, you vote on all kinds of things other than the president. And remember, the Electoral College votes in December after the popular vote. And how do we know public opinion? So we poll the people. We canvass, we go door to door, phone to phone, and we see what the people think. And we try to use a random sample, meaning that you don't just poll all old people, or all young people, or all blacks, or all whites. You have a random sample, and you make sure that you have a diverse group of people that you're polling. And remember, like my grandma says, consider the source. So if you see a poll, you're like, I don't know about this. This looks like it's favoring the Democrats, or it's favoring the Republicans. You need to consider who the source is. Gallup, which is both of these polls over here, Gallup is probably the best political poll there is out there. And now, 3 other things that you might vote on. The first thing would be a recall, which is a vote to remove an official from office. This is Scott Walker. He was the governor of Wisconsin. He is the only governor to ever have survived a recall. So a recall is different than impeachment. Impeachment means that the official in office did something wrong. A recall means that the people just don't like them anymore and want to take them out of office. So he survived this, and it's a vote to remove an official from office. A referendum is a vote on an issue that is suggested by the legislature. North Carolina's Amendment 1 was suggested by the legislature, and it began as a referendum. So this is either for or against it. Remember, Amendment 1 is about marriage. The last thing that you might vote on is an initiative/proposition, and this is a vote on an issue that is suggested by a citizen. These start as grassroots movements with the people. Grassroots means with the people. So, California had same-sex marriage legalized way before North Carolina did, and this was called Proposition 8. So, that was about same-sex marriage, and it was suggested by a citizen. The legalization of marijuana in Colorado was also suggested by a citizen. So here's my meme. Meanwhile, in Colorado, covered in clouds. So, again, an initiative or a proposition is a vote on an issue suggested by a citizen. You can remember this as I for initiative. I suggested as a citizen. So, this has been the election process and public opinion.